Welcome back to the Redneck Racing YouTube channel, everybody. As you can see, we have a little bit of a change of scenery here. I actually have the car back at my mom and dad's house. This is just a lot closer to where I live, so it'll make it easier for me to get here and work on this. And all the chassis work is done, so now we're just going to be working on a lot of the drivetrain stuff, and I don't need as big of a space to work on this. We did bring the car to chassis inspection, and it did pass. So you can see we have our sticker right here. And we are certified to 750 and slower at 3,600 pounds. So that's a huge relief that that's all taken care of. What we're going to be working on today is getting some of the steering set up and get the rack and pinion welded in and make a steering column. And we're also going to be working on the wishbone. I'm actually going to do the wishbone first because before I do the steering linkage, I need an engine block with an oil pan and the driver's side header. I've got all that stuff almost ready to go in here, so we'll be doing that a little bit later. But right now, go to the back of the car and take a look at what we got going on for the wishbone. So as you can see, this is kind of where we left off with the 4-link. I have the rod ends over here bolted in for the wishbone. That one needs a little bit of clearancing done to it, and then I'll get that one put in. I have the wishbone slider that I got with the chassis kit from Chris Alston. They gave me a whole wishbone kit. This is 1.25" by 120 wall. The rest of the wishbone was, I believe, 3/4 inch or 5/8 inch, and I just didn't feel comfortable running that small of a tube and that small of heim joints. Not those heim joints, those are the bigger ones. There was really small heim joints that they gave me to put together this wishbone, so I'm just gonna beef everything up and make my own because I think that's gonna be a lot better. They also had these heim joints just bolt right to the 4-link brackets right here, and I wanted to have a dedicated wishbone mounting. I believe they actually wanted the 2 points in the back and the single point in the front. It doesn't really matter which way you run it. I do already have the tabs welded on to hold these heim joints. Everything should be completely square. I know that the 4-link brackets are completely dead centered on the car, and I know that the distance between the 4-link bracket and where that tab is exactly the same on both sides. So we should be completely centered. We should just be able to make a totally symmetrical wishbone, and it should center the rear end because I know that that point right there is completely centered on the rear end housing. The other thing you'll notice is the orientation of how I have these heim joints set up. I have them like this and not like this, and I have these tall, what they call misalignment spacers in here. The misalignment spacers give this a nice big range of motion for the rear end. You might be thinking, why not just install the heim joint like this and then it can go up and down as much as it needs to? There's a good reason for installing them like this, and it's because these heim joints are a lot stronger in this position when they're trying to resist movement this way. So the wishbone is trying to keep the rear end centered in the car this way. And if you have these heim joints like this, they're trying to resist movement this way. It's a lot easier for them to just pop this spherical out of the heim joint. If you flip them like this, it would have to break the entire cup before it would be able to pop the spherical out of there. It's a little bit more difficult to set them up like this because you need to get misalignment spacers and make sure you have enough travel, but in the end it's going to be a lot stronger, so we're going to do it this way. That one is in the same orientation right there. Everything should be as strong as possible. So now you can get a little bit of an idea on how I'm going to have this wishbone set up in here. I actually need to trim that bar on the other side just a little bit more. I'm just going to take some out of that end, and I'll probably put a brace between the middle right there. So I got the wishbone tacked together now. Before I finish weld anything, I want to weld a gusset in the middle here just so that this doesn't decide to pull together in the middle when I try and weld it together. So I actually think what I'm going to use for the gusset is what they originally gave me to make these bars out of. So you can see the difference there. This was a piece of the original wishbone that I was supposed to use for this bar. It is probably chromoly, so it's probably stronger, but it's pretty thin wall thickness. I just didn't feel comfortable using something this small as the main beam of my wishbone, but for a gusset I think it'll be just fine. Get this tacked in and then I can pull the whole wishbone out and finish welding everything together. So there you can see the finished product. It's pretty simple. It's just the 2 big bars go into each of the heim joints, and then I put a cross brace in the middle right there. The biggest problem that I had was getting the slip joint to fit down on the differential side. After you weld those bars on to that centerpiece, it kind of pulls everything together and shrinks that tube, and then the slider doesn't really like to slide in there anymore. So what I wound up doing to fix the problem was I got a 1-inch hole saw bit. The slider is, I believe, a 1-inch OD. The piece that it slides into is 1.25 inches by 120 wall, so the ID of that should be 1.01, and these hole saws typically cut a little bit bigger than what they say they cut, so that worked pretty much perfectly just to run this through there and widen it back up. It slides pretty nice, not quite as good as it did in the first place, but it'll be good enough. So the next thing I gotta work on is dropping the engine in here, and then we'll start putting together the rack and pinion and the steering linkage. I kind of have it mocked up in there right now, but it's not welded to anything. Alright guys, as you can see, we have mock-up motor in the car. I have the driver's side cylinder head on. I have the driver's side exhaust manifold on, but I took that off. Just give me some extra room putting this rack and pinion in. I have the one bracket welded on already. I got it pretty much set at the right height. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of re-level it out and then add the second bracket on right here that holds the other side. Hopefully that's in the right spot because I just went ahead and welded the whole thing all the way in. It should be fine. I still do have a little bit of adjustment in the bolts here. The holes are a little on the big side, so when I go to put this guy on, I can adjust it a little bit more if needed. As far as the height goes, I pretty much have this installed at the height of those lower control arm bolts. The way you want to set this up so that you have the least amount of bump steer is you pretty much want your tie rods parallel with the lower control arms. So if you were to draw a line from that bolt to the lower ball joint over there, you want your tie rod level with that. TRZ has a much more informative video on this where they show exactly what affects what, but that's essentially the gist of how you want to set this up. Another thing I tried to do in setting this up is to make everything as straight of a line as possible. In a perfect world, you want all this stuff all in a straight line here. Honestly, if I move those bolts out to that hole right there, it probably would be in almost a perfect straight line. I think I want to leave them in the back because it'll give me a little bit more turning radius. If I go back any farther, that U-joint is going to run into the side of the block here, and it's going to get pretty close to the frame rail, and this is about as close as I want it. I'm already probably going to end up trimming a chunk out of the oil pan right there to get it to clear a little bit better because it's a little bit closer than I would like it to be. I got the first part of the steering shaft put in down there. It's quite a bit long right now, which is good. We can just trim it down to the right size, put another U-joint right there, and then have it go up to that U-joint, go down kind of like that, and you can see right where these two guys meet down there is pretty much where we're going to need to put a U-joint. It does look like I'm probably going to have to put a dent in the header right here. I can't really move this U-joint much farther back than that, and that's because I need to get this Delrin bushing inside of the outer steering shaft or the steering column right there, and then I also need to put the lock collar, which I have right up here right now, holding the steering shaft in up on top. When it's all said and done, that needs to clamp onto the steering shaft down there to keep the steering column from coming back out that way. The Motion Raceworks steering column quick connect right here will weld on the end up here. That'll keep the steering shaft from sliding that way, and this collar will go down there to keep it from sliding back out. So I'm going to get some of these steering shafts cut down to the right length, fit up some U-joints, and then when I have everything at the right length going from the rack and pinion up to the firewall, then I'm going to trim the steering column to length up in the cabin of the car. So we have everything kind of set where it needs to be, and then I'll start tacking everything together. So I'm getting these U-joints welded onto the steering shaft. I think I got everything set up the way I want it. And none of the U-joints are binding. Well, one of them's binding a little bit, but I think I can just nip at that with a die grinder and get it to fix itself. One thing I did want to mention right now was how you want to set up your U-joints when you're welding them onto your steering shafts. You want to make sure that everything is in phase to limit how much it will bind. So you can see here is how you don't want to do it. You want to make sure that your pin going through this way on this side, you want the pin going through the same way down here. This joint can pivot out and that joint can pivot out like that. So that's how you want to have your U-joint set up in phase to limit the amount of binding that you have. So I'm going to finish tacking this together, throw it back in the car. Some of these joints I'm actually going to bolt together, and I'll show you that when I have everything mocked up in the car. Bolting them together is just going to allow me to take everything apart on down the road. If I ever need to take the steering shaft out for whatever reason, I can do that. Alright, I now have all the pieces for my steering shaft made. I have all the holes drilled. When you're drilling the holes, make sure that you have, a decent amount of meat left on the other end of the shaft here. And you can see where I drilled the hole in here. Pretty much just centered it. I tried to kind of shoot for the same way they had this put in right there. So I drilled that hole first all the way through, and then I stuck this in here and kind of used this piece as a jig to make sure all the holes lined up. I also have the support tacked in to the frame down there. The first thing you want to do when you're doing this is make sure you have your steering shaft set in the right spot and where you want your steering wheel to be. The whole steering rack is from TRZ, and I've got a Motion Raceworks adapter and a Motion Raceworks steering wheel with the Motion Raceworks quick disconnect. That all fit together just perfectly. I did end up needing to modify this bracket right here. The one that they sent me from TRZ was not even close to fitting. Anyways, I just made my own bracket. Now it works just fine. I did play around with the plate down there as well, because that didn't quite line up, although it was very close. Get this bolt tightened up here first. That locks your steering column in place. Now your steering shaft can still slide in and out, as you can see. And then you have this collar right here that slides over this, and the collar locks up against the bushing that's in here. You do have to install these bushings yourself. So once you get your steering column, the outer black piece, set to the right length, you can tighten that collar. Keeps the steering wheel nice and tight, or your steering shaft from wiggling back and forth. I could have kept mine a little bit longer, but I also was running into issues with it hitting the header right here where this primary tube comes out. So another thing to keep in mind, make sure that your steering column clears your headers, and make sure you can still get to all of your spark plugs with the steering column in. If you were taking your steering column and cutting it down through here like I was originally planning on doing, just make sure you can still get to the spark plug. So I'm going to put this piece in first down here. This bottom U-joint splines onto the rack and pinion. Then I can install this piece. Now the last part, I can slide this back down into place. Just like that. Oh my gosh, why do I drop those nuts? Get the nut on. I'm not going to tighten any of that down yet because I do need to pull this back out to finish welding everything. Alright, well, you guys saw there, the wheels turned. Everything felt fine in the steering wheel. I do suspect that the U-joint right down by the rack and pinion is binding just a little bit. It can't be much because I can't feel it in the steering wheel. Everything feels nice and smooth. So that's going to do it for this video, putting the wishbone and the steering in the car. There is a little bit of tweaking I have left to do with the steering shaft. For the most part, I got it all put in there. It's all painted and it works. I can go lock to lock. The rack is centered fairly well. Obviously it still needs to be aligned, but we're going to worry about that once the rest of the car is done. The wishbone is all put together in the back. I do need to pull that out and paint that yet. I'm probably going to wait to do that until I take the wheels out when I put the tubs in. So that video will be coming at some point as well. But for right now, that's all that we're going to cover today. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you want to watch any of the other videos that we're going to be bringing out on this car. And we'll see you guys in the next video.